Hello, it's John here. This is the promised follow-up to the talk that Roger and I gave on Monday with regard to printing your photographs. Now I'm going to focus purely on Lightroom in this video, mainly because Photoshop isn't an application that I use, so I'm not that familiar with it. So I'm going to start off briefly by saying, why should you actually print an image? Well, this is a quote from Stuart Lowe, who's the founder of the Scottish Landscape Photographer of the Year competition. And he said an image only becomes a photograph when it's printed. Now, if you think about, back in the olden days, this would be true. You take your camera out, you go and shoot a film of images, and then you send them to the chemist, or you may process them in your own darkroom, and you'd produce some prints that you would then show to people. And it's the prints that are the photograph, it's not the image that's on the negative. And so this is why I like to print my photographs, because there's something quite nice about having a piece of paper in your hand that you can hand around to people and say, look, this is what I produced. So that's why, in my opinion, you should try and print your images. Of course, the other reason for doing it is that it's one way to be certain that you have a backup of your photographs. Imagine what would happen if your hard disk failed. You might lose all of your photographs, and this could be your backup for it. So that's why you should print your image. So now we're going to dive into Lightroom, and we're going to look at preparing the image and sharpening. Sharpening is an important step. If you think about it, when you're showing your image on a screen, it's typically 2 megapixels. So if your image, the sharpness of the image when you're doing it small like that isn't as important as it is when you're printing it much larger on a piece of paper. Even A4 is a higher resolution than your screen. So the amount of sharpening you need to do for a print is more than you would need to do for displaying on a screen or projection. And we'll show you how Lightroom can help you with that, where you only need to process the image once. So let's go into Lightroom. Here we are, we're in Lightroom, and these are the images that we're going to look at. I'm going to look at mainly this one and this one for this video. So let's look at this one first. This is one that I did of Scaleba Force up in the North York Moors. We're going to dive into the Develop module. Now, in terms of processing the image, you don't do anything different in here to process this for a print as you would do for processing it to go onto a projector or onto a screen to show somebody. So we do all the same things that we would do normally. So we'll adjust the highlights and the shadows and the whites and so forth. We'll sharpen it in the same way that we would do normally. There's no difference here. The differences come when we output. Now, the reason for this is because Lightroom follows a 3-stage sharpening process, as pioneered by Dr. Bruce Fraser, who basically invented the definitive process that Adobe use within Lightroom and recommend for sharpening images. And that 3-step process is you have input sharpening, creative sharpening, and output sharpening. Input sharpening happens automatically. You don't have any say over it. This is all about demosaicing the image as it comes off the sensor to produce the image that you can see. Creative sharpening is what we would do here in the detail panel in Lightroom, or if you might use Unsharp Mask or Smart Sharpen in Photoshop to produce your sharpening. The final step of sharpening is output sharpening. So what you would normally do is you would process this image in the normal way, and then if you want to output that image for screen use, you would export it, and in here we have output sharpening, and you would sharpen for screen. And so what that will do is that will sharpen the JPEG to a suitable level for you to project. But that may not be the right amount of sharpening if you want to print it. So in Photoshop, what you would then do is you would probably make another copy and sharpen that for printing. And so now you have two versions of that image. In Lightroom, you don't need to do that. In Lightroom, you just process it once and then you sharpen it if you need to output it to a JPEG, or if you need to do it to a print, and you sharpen it at that time. And that basically is all you need to do with sharpening. So you're not going to see the sharpening I've done on here for printing, because that happens at the printing stage. So what we've got here is my image, and that's good enough for this first step. So let's now look at the print module, and we're going to look at this print module. We're also going to look at proofing the photo to make sure that actually it looks like it's going to print how I want it to print. What we have here, we'll just have a quick overview of the layout of the print module. So we have some things called templates. We'll look at templates in a moment. We've got the collections that we're going to be using, so we can create collections and use collections that we might set up in the library module. Along the bottom we have the film strip with the selected photos in the current collection or the current folder. And then on the right hand side, from top to bottom, we have things that we can configure for printing. Now, the print module, or the printing subsystem within Lightroom, is arguably the most sophisticated printing subsystem that Adobe do. It's incredibly powerful, and you can set up all sorts of layouts. You can set up your own custom layouts. At the moment we've got this set up to do a single image, but we can do contact sheets, we can do overlapping images, we can create logos, we can create all sorts of things. We can even create new JPEGs that you might want to use on a business card, for example. But the problem is it's not very intuitive, and some of the things that we'll need to configure, some of them on the left hand side in this panel down here in page setup, some of it are in the wrong position in my opinion on the right hand side, and some things are just hidden. So I'm just going to cover the basic things here. So if we start out at the top, we have a thing called layout style. We don't need to worry too much about it when you're printing just one image per page, but this allows you to create a custom style where you may have overlapping images or some other clever layout that you want that isn't part of the standard ones. The standard layouts are here in the templates. So one image 4x6 going all the way to 2x2 cells, 4 images wide landscape orientation. Then we can have contact sheets, and a landscape contact sheet 5x9 or 5x11. So you've got all of these different things here, and all of these you can create your own by using the layout style. Normally you would never need to worry about this. Then we have image settings. Image settings simply indicate how this image is going to fill the cell. Now I've got my paper, the white border here is simulating the paper, and it's simulating A3 paper. Let me switch off that information so we can see a little bit more. So we're simulating the paper here with my image inside the cell. Now we've got a couple of things here. So we've got zoom to fill. So when I click on that, it's going to fill the cell, but you can lose part of the image, although you can adjust it by just dragging the image, you know, up and down, back to and sideways to make it fit. You are going to, in effect, crop part of the image. Now imagine this was portrait paper. In fact, let's set this up. I'll go to page setup and I'm going to change the orientation to portrait. So now the paper is going to be printed portrait, but my image is going to be across the narrow part of the paper. If we click on rotate to fit, it'll rotate the image to fit it. Now I don't know about you, but I actually find that quite difficult to see whether I've got things right or not. So what I tend to prefer to do is to set my paper to landscape, and then I can see whether my image is fitting and whether it looks right or not. If we had more than one cell on this page, in fact, let's do that. Let's do 4 wide. What I can do is I can repeat this image on the page. I'm not entirely sure why you would want to do that, but if you needed to, you could. The idea behind this is that we can select 4 images and it would fill each cell with those 4 images. The next one we have is layout, and so what we have here is we can dictate what the margins are, how we can dictate the grid on here, so we can have 4 rows by 1 column. We could change the number of columns in here. So this is how you would set up a custom contact sheet. Let's go back and we'll choose my single paper, go back to landscape, and let's go back to my image settings because we've got zoom to fill and I don't want that. At the moment it looks a bit small, so here in the layout we can start to adjust things like the cell size and the width simply by using the sliders. We can also adjust the width by dragging and dropping in here, and this will position your image on the paper. So we can adjust the cell size. We can also adjust the margins, so we can bring the margins in, we can then bring the cell back up. We would ideally like a bottom margin in here, and so we can play around to get the orientation of the photo to fit the paper as we would like it. I never print right out to the edge, although my printer is capable of doing that, and I can certainly do that here in Lightroom. I don't, because I'm nearly always going to be mounting this photo, and if you print right to the edge, it means mounting the image is actually quite difficult. So I tend to leave a border here, and it just aids in mounting the photo in the card. Next thing we have are the guides. So you can see along the top we have the rulers on top and side, and then we have these faint grey lines. These are the guides which we can drag about to indicate where the image is going to go. You can switch this off if you want to. I personally have never needed to do that. This, in my view, is in the wrong place. I think this really ought to be higher up. But nevertheless, it is there. And then we come on to 2 of the most important panels in the printing. One allows us to put various other components to the printed image. We can put on an identity plate. As you can see, it's got my name on here on the side, so this you might want to put on there if you're going to show this image in a gallery or something like that, to say, you know, this is my photo. If you At the moment it's set to 90 degrees. We can always change it so there's no rotation, and then we can drag that to appear where we want it. We can also change the opacity and the scale, so we can make it smaller or bigger. We can change the font simply by going into here and edit. So we can change the text and we can change the font that we're using. We could even use a graphical one. If we don't want an identity plate, which I don't in this, we'll just switch that off. We can add a watermark to the image. So if we do a signed watermark, we can see down at the bottom it's in black, so it may not be clear, but we've got my name down there. Again, we don't need that. We can also put in here some page information, so we could have a page number. Down in the bottom right hand corner we've got a page number of 1. So if you were going to produce a book, for example, then you can put a page number on there. We've got some page information, so we can see what printer profile we're using, what printer we're using, whether we've got any sharpening on here or not. I'm not entirely sure why you would ever want to do that, unless you're going to actually mount this, but you need that information for other reference. And then we can print some crop marks on here. It may not be clear to see, but you have some little crop marks on the corners against the cells, so if you needed to crop it, you've got those on there. And then we have photo information. The photo information that we can put on there is caption, date, the equipment used, so we can see the camera and the lens, for example, what exposure we used, so we can see it's 3.2 seconds at f8, a file name, a sequence, the title and the author. If I had a title, I don't have a title on this image, but if we did, we could do it. Or we can use some custom text that we can edit. So we could then start putting some of our own things in here. So let's get rid of that custom text part, and we're going to put in here caption by, and then the creator. We'll say done to that. And if I had a caption, it would put on here Scale Before by John Dobson, if that's what my caption was. But for this, I don't want photo info. But you may find that useful when you print your images out, that when it comes to actually compiling them for, say, one of the competitions, you've already got a caption on it. So now when you fill out the entry form on the website, you can see type the entry forms to the image that you want to enter. Then the last one we have in here, which is quite important, is the print job. This is where we indicate we're going to send this to the printer. Now notice it doesn't say what printer that we're going to send this to. I'll show you that in a moment. Print resolution. This is going to be dependent upon the type of printer that you're using. And by type of printer, I mean whether it's Canon or Epson or Hewlett Packard. Canon printers print at 360 dpi, Epson do 300. Now you can set that to whatever value that you like, but if you set that to say 720, you won't get a sharper image. All it will do is it will take up more memory on your computer and more memory in the printer. Then we have our print sharpening. Now the print sharpening is different to the sharpening that we did when we export the image, and it's additional to the sharpening that we do in the develop module. This is the output sharpening that I talked about earlier. The amount of sharpening that you do is dictated to as low, standard or high, and this really depends on A, how sharp your image is, and B, what sort of paper that you're going to use. And we're going to talk about the paper in a moment. But for what I'm using here, I'm going to leave this on standard. I know that standard for this image is going to be fine. And then we need to set the media type. You only have two options in here, matte or glossy. So if you're not using matte paper, it will be glossy. Glossy will also include satin or luster or pearl paper. Next we have color management. Now I haven't mentioned this before, but this is where you would use something called a profile. This is what you set to make sure that the colors that you've created in the develop module, that you spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to get right, is going to match what's on the paper. Different paper, whether it's glossy or luster or matte, will produce a different effect. I'm going to show you soft proofing in a moment and you'll get an idea. But if you've seen the prints go up in the competitions, most of those prints are printed on luster paper. So there's one or two that I've seen go up which are on gloss, and one or two which are on matte. Now this will also tie in with print sharpening. If you're printing on matte paper, you would want to set print sharpening to high, because matte paper is inherently not a sharp medium, and you would set your printer profile to the appropriate profile in here. Now I've got 4 profiles set up by default. Notice I don't select manage by printer. You never want to do that. You spent a lot of time getting your colours right in here. What you do not want to do is send that to the printer and say, well, you know, this is what I've set up, but I'll let you sort out what the colours are going to be on the paper. That's not what you want to do. You want to select a profile. Now these are the profiles I use for the paper that I like to use, but if it's not one of those, I can choose other, and in here we can then select other paper profiles that we may want to use. I use permajet paper. I know other people use paper like photo speed or the printer manufacturer's own paper. The reality is the paper that you use in here is entirely personal. There's no hard and fast rule with this, with the paper manufacturer. As I say, I like to use permajet. I like the look and the feel that it gives my photos. Other people use photo speed for the same reason. They prefer that look. I know Lou, for example, likes to use Canon paper. He's got a Canon printer. He uses Canon paper because he finds it easier to print with that. But I'm going to use Oyster Plus, which is my luster finish paper. And then we have the intent, perceptual or relative. I'm going to come back to this when we look at soft proofing, which we'll do in a moment, but there's just one or two other things I need to cover first. What you will often find as you process your images within Lightroom and you export them to a JPEG that you're going to show in, say, a print competition or on your tablet or laptop to friends and family, that those images will look brighter than they do when they're printed. And the reason for that is that when you're projecting the image or you're showing it on a laptop or a projector, you're using transmitted light, and those always look brighter and more vivid than reflected light, which is what you get off the paper. So what you may find that you need to do is you process this in your normal way, and then we adjust the brightness here to make the image look brighter on the paper and match what you're seeing on the computer monitor. Now I should say that It's important when you're processing your images that you're using a calibrated monitor, and you should be checking the calibration of your monitor every 3 or 4 months, because your monitor can drift out. The other thing that you can do is you can adjust your contrast. Personally, I've never found that I've had a need to do that, but if you find that you want to add more boost to your images, you can adjust the contrast as well, and it will only apply when you print them. It won't apply when you're displaying those as a JPEG. Now, the other thing that we need to do, I'm going to show you how I change this with my printer, which is a Canon Pixma Pro 1. Unfortunately, what I'm going to show you is different for different printer manufacturers, for Windows and the Mac. Even if the manufacturer of the printer is the same as mine, if you're using a Canon printer, you will find this setting in another place. This is unfortunately down to the printer manufacturers. And the thing we need to do is, I'm going to go into page setup. I'm going to go to properties. And the thing I need to switch off in here is I need to tell Windows, and I need to tell the printer, don't change my colors. I've already said on here that I'm using a profile to make my colors match the paper. And what I definitely don't want to happen is for Windows or the printer to take over control and adjust them a second time. So what I need to do is I need to switch off the printer making any changes or using any profile. To do that on my printer, it's not intuitive at all. I need to toggle the color intensity manual adjustment, go into matching, and make sure that my color correction is set to none. By default, driver matching is the selected option. If you do not change this, you will find that the colors of your print will be different to what you're seeing on the monitor. It is so important that you switch this to none. Unfortunately, I can't tell you where this setting is for your printer. I can't even tell you what it's called, because the printer manufacturers will quite often call this something else. But this is the single most important step that you must do, is to make sure that you switch your color correction off on the printer itself. Okay, so what that's done is that has set up the page, and it's set up the printer with my adjustment to make it brighter. I'm telling it to use the appropriate print profile. Then I can either select the printer here, but I've already selected it, haven't I? Because I did it in the page setup. So all I need to do then is click on print. But if you click on printer and OK, or you just click on print, it will print your image using these settings. And that's all you need to do. Now there's quite a few steps you have to go through here, and you might think, oh, I'm never going to remember that. Fortunately, what we can do is we can click on this little plus next to the template browser, and we can create a preset. And the preset will remember all of the settings in here. It remembers all of the settings in page setup. And so all I need to do is to click on my image in here. This is a black and white one. And so I can say, well, I'm going to print this on titanium A3 plus black and white. And it will set up my printer to say, well, we're using black and white. It's a black and white photo print. And it will remember that it's got to switch off the color correction. It will set up all of the things on here to suit a black and white image. And then I can choose the next image here, and we can say, okay, this I'm going to make on A3 oyster paper. And actually, let's do A3 titanium landscape. So it's set it on titanium paper. It's chosen the profile for me. And so once you have this set up once, you only need to click on the plus in here and save those settings as a template. So when you come to print the following month, you just click on the template here and it will set up your paper and the printer for you, and you don't need to worry about it again. Now let's look at what this perceptual and relative intent is. We're going to do that by going to the develop module, and we're going to soft proof this. To soft proof the image, we're going to try and simulate how it's going to look on different types of paper. We do this by clicking on this checkbox, which is down here, called soft proofing. And what will happen is up here, above the basic panel, we have this new section here where we can choose a printer profile. And we can simulate the paper and the ink. Now this is why it's gone a little bit sort of, well, foggy if you like. And notice that the colour of the border has changed from a grey to white. Because what we're doing is we're simulating the paper and the ink. In the histogram up here, we have an icon here on the left hand side which will show us whether or not the image is out of the colour gamut that the monitor can display, and one over here which will highlight the areas which are going to be out of gamut for this particular paper profile. Let's just switch that on. So we can see we've got a few areas which have gone red here, which are out of gamut. This means those are colours that the printer and that paper combination cannot reproduce. So what we can do in here is, we might think, well, okay, I'm going to desaturate that particular colour. So I've gone into the HSL panel, I'm going to choose the targeted adjustment tool, and I'm just going to drag down in here to desaturate that to something that the printer can produce. Now because I've got soft proofing switched on, it's going to say, do you want to create a virtual copy for soft proofing? Why might you want to do this? Well, suppose that you want to produce this on different paper, and you might want to see how it's going to look on different paper and then compare it to the original. Under that circumstance, you may want to create a proof copy. Do that by clicking, and we have down here in the film strip the real copy and a virtual copy. And so what we can then do is, in the library module, we can then compare those to see how they're going to look. And we might choose a different profile. Let's choose gloss. And again, we've still got something which is out of gamut, so we might adjust that one. And we can then create another virtual copy. Now at the moment we're using relative as the intent. And what that will do is that will keep all of the colours which the printer can do. It won't adjust those, but it will adjust the colours which it can't produce, which are out of gamut. The other one, which is perceptual, does something slightly different. And what it does is it'll compress all of the colour, it'll change all of the colours if you like. It compresses the colour space or the colour gamut region used by the photo all by the same amount. And what this can do is this can cause other colours to appear false. Now there's no hard and fast right way or wrong way with using the intent here. This is something which is going to depend purely on your taste and your like or dislike. So in here we may decide, well actually I'm going to switch that off, and because I've changed it from relative to perceptual, you can get different colours in here appearing wrong. But play around with these things. the only way really to determine which one of these you like is to try them. Now you may find there's no difference in your photos, in which case it doesn't matter. But you might find that you get better reproduction by using perceptual or relative. But it's a personal choice. All this is doing is indicating which colours are going to be capable to be printed by your printer. Now the final thing that I want to do is, this is all very well if you are printing it yourself. What if you're going to send this to an online lab or a bureau for printing? Now there's two ways you can do this. One is you can right click on here and you can export your image, presumably to full size and full resolution, so they can print it. But when you do it like this, you're not actually going to be certain that the colours you have in your image are going to be what appears on the final print. This will be great for printing and showing on a projector or a screen, but on a finished print you might find it's not quite what you're expecting. So the better way of doing this is to go to the print module, and you to go through all of the same settings that we did before, but this time we're going to change the print to from printer to JPEG file. Then in here we can set a printer profile. So I think I've got some profiles on here. I know maybe I haven't, but you can get a printer profile from your lab, hopefully, and you can set this up so if I know that I'm going to print this on matte paper, I can set my printer profile up to matte, and then we can just click on print to file and it will generate a JPEG using the lab's printer profile for the paper that they're using. And so now you can be certain that the colours that you are seeing, because you would have proofed them, are going to be what you're expecting. And if you find that when you get the first print back that it's dark, again you can just adjust the brightness, print another file and send it off to them, and then when you've got that right, you save a template and you can use that every time. And this is a better way of actually sending your images to a lab such as SimLab or Loxley Colour or any of the other ones, particularly if they provide a profile for the paper that they're using. Not all of them have them available on their website, so you might need to ring them. If they don't provide a profile, then you're likely to be struggling unless you can identify the printer and the paper that they're using and find a profile that someone has done online somewhere. Now, one other thing on the profiles, most paper manufacturers rather, if you buy your paper from them, will allow you to print off a colour chart that you can send to them. You tell them what printer that you're using and they will generate a custom printer profile to suit your paper and your printer, because every printer is going to be slightly different. If you were a print master, you would be able to generate these profiles yourself using the normal calibration tools that you can purchase. And most print masters will do this every time they change a cartridge or every time they change a batch of paper. They would generate a new print profile and they would use that for that profile or that cartridge. That batch of paper or that cartridge. Personally, I'm not that fussed about this. I use a generic one that you can get from the paper manufacturer's website, and I just use the generic one, and I find that it works just right for me. That's really all there is to do with printing from within Lightroom. So the next question is, we you know, we've seen that I'm using 4 different profiles of paper. I've got matte, I have luster, I have gloss, and I have titanium. So the question is, well, how do I choose which paper to use? Well, this is largely something that is a personal choice. I happen to like the metallic luster paper, but I don't use it on every print. It's quite expensive, as I'll show you in a moment. The luster paper produces, you know, nice and sharp images. Gloss paper will show you the sharpest images and with the most detail, but it has a downside of being quite reflective. Matte paper, on the other hand, is the least sharp, has no reflection at all, so if you have an image with a lot of detail in there, you may not want to print on matte. But there is one very good time when you may want to do that. Let me show you. So we have here an image of Roseberry topping taken from Gribdale Terrace. If I zoom in here on the left hand side, this will take a moment, it's quite a large image. We can see things are pretty sharp. Now when I took this, it was a really windy day, so you have some motion in the foliage, particularly in the foreground, which is not great. But the image itself is reasonably sharp. But if we come over here onto the right hand side where we have the cliff face, now that is definitely not sharp. This was a consequence of the lens that I was using. In fact, I shouldn't have used a tilt shift lens, I should have used a normal lens and it would have been better. But it was blowing a bit of a hoolie on this day and I didn't want to run the risk of getting dust onto the sensor. Incidentally, while I mentioned dust, you may look at your image like this and you think, well, there's no dust spots on here. You should always check for dust spots, because if you may not see it on this image or when you project it, because you're only looking at a tiny 2 megapixel image. When you print, it's probably 10 times that, and any dust spots which are on your image will be visible in your finished print. Trust me on this. It's so important you make sure that your images are dust spot free. That's quite easy to do. We just use the spot removal tool. We click on the visualize spots checkbox, and in here we can see anything which looks like a little circle like these are dust spots. If I print this image out, they will be visible on the finished print. So I'm just going to click on those. Actually, just get rid of that one because it's too big. So I'll make my brush a little bit smaller and we'll just click on that. We should probably do the same thing up there, but you get the idea. And now I can print my image and those dust spots will not be visible. But if they were, if I didn't get rid of them, they would be visible. They would spoil your image and a judge would pick up on that. Now we've already said that this is not sharp. So I have 2 options I can do with this. One option, which is what I actually did when I put this into a print competition, is to print this small. If you print it small, the lack of apparent sharpness in there is not so obvious. But the alternative thing that I could have done is I could have printed this on matte paper. Because matte paper itself is inherently not sharp, people can't say, won't be able to look at that and say, well, that cliff face isn't sharp, because none of the image was going to be tack sharp. The question is it going to be good enough? The only person who can make that decision is you as the photographer. But if you do have something which is not sharp, rather than print it on gloss or on luster paper, print it on matte. It'll do the job. So the final thing we need to look at is how much does this all cost? So what we've got here is a spreadsheet which I use to work out how much it costs me to print an image. And the ones I'm interested in are those ones. What we have here is the paper that we're using. We have the dimensions of the paper, and then these two columns H and I indicate how much it costs me in terms of the ink to print that image. The HQ is high quality, the SQ is standard quality, and we can see from this that it costs me 5 times as much than it does for standard quality, just in terms of ink usage. And this is true across the board. The question is, if I print this in high quality, do I get 5 times better quality than I do standard quality? For my printer, the answer is no, I don't. Consequently, every single image of mine that you've seen in a print competition has been printed at standard quality. The next thing we have is the cost of the paper, and so if we look at the A3 Plus Oyster paper, at standard quality it costs me £1.50 for each print. That's how much it costs me for an A3 Plus printer. If we go to then compare that with someone like, say, SimLab, which is what I've done on this spreadsheet. So for an A3 print, SimLab are going to charge me £1.10. I'm going to mount it, which is going to cost me £1.70, giving me a total of £2.80 for that print. 5 prints in the competition. I've got postage and packing, or delivery charges if you like, for that size, so it costs me £20 for one competition. If I'm going to print A3 myself, then the cost of the print is £1.22. Remember, the last one was for A3 Plus. The mount is going to be the same, so it's £2.90 per print. I've got 5 of them. Obviously I have no delivery charges because I'm doing it myself, so it's going to cost me £14.60. Over the year, I am £30 better off by printing it myself than by sending it to SimLab. But I do have the added complexity of actually managing the print myself, of managing the printer, making sure that I've got profiles switched off, making sure that the printer's not doing what it shouldn't be doing. So you've got that extra complexity, whereas with SimLab you just send them a JPEG and then a day or two later you'll get back the printed photo. Hopefully it's going to be bright enough for you and with the correct finish. The question is it actually worth £30? Well, that's a personal choice. If we look at the cost of my printer, around about £650 currently. So at £30 saving per year, it's going to take me 22 years to get my money back if I'm just using this for competitions. So it's something you need to think about. There's no wrong or right answer here. It's going to be purely down to you. Personally, I like the fun of actually printing it myself and actually having something in my hands straight away that I can look at and I can go and show friends and family. It's good fun. I think it is good fun. But you may not choose to do that. You might choose to go and send it to someone like SimLab or Loxley Colour or someone like that. So in a nutshell, quite a long, big nutshell, admittedly, but in a nutshell, that's how you print from within Lightroom. Now, some of these things, such as the cost of the prints, are the same whether you're using Photoshop, whether you're using Elements, PaintShop Pro, Affinity Photo, Lightroom, whatever. The cost of the printing is going to be the same. It's just how you get to that print. But the key thing you must do to get the colours right from both Photoshop and from Lightroom is you must tell the printer Do not adjust the colours here. My application is handling it all. And that's really all I want to say about printing. This is a bit of a long video, I know, but printing is a complex topic. Anyway, I hope you found this useful, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you for watching.